So the US have a carrier fleet. It's led by the Eisenhower. It's busy. It's laden with weaponry. The Brits have got a couple of beautiful carriers. They're in dock. What's going on?
It's a bit of a tragic tale, actually. Two of the biggest aircraft carriers that the Royal Navy has ever had in its inventory, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, which are phenomenally capable carriers, 72,000 tons. They are have the potential to be bristling with military capability, and yet the one time with the bombing missions against the Houthis, which the US are using their embarked aviation, bristling with F-18s, Tomahawk missiles being fired from the carriers. It's the ideal weapon to use in this sort of conflict, and yet what are the Brits doing? We are using Typhoons flying out of Cyprus on 3,000-mile plus round trips, plus air-to-air refueling, plus everything entailed, whilst these two ships are tied up in dock at the moment. I think part of the challenge, it's quite new. I mean, 2017, Queen Elizabeth first came into service, 2019 for Prince of Wales. And what we tend to forget is it's not just about the carrier. These carriers don't go to sea on their own. They go to sea with destroyers, other vessels to provide air defence for the fleet above water, and they also ships to look below water. They also go with a submarine, and they also go where they need a couple of fleet auxiliary vessels to provide wet support, so fuels and stuff like that, but also dry stores support.
So is it that the carriers aren't working, or they're short of something else? What's
well, it's both. Interestingly, it's both. So the Prince of Wales came into service, and it turned out, I think one of the prop shafts for the propeller shafts is slightly misaligned, a matter of millimeters, but that's enough to mean it doesn't work properly. It needs to be fixed. But there's also, inevitably, with new piece of equipment, there's some teething troubles. So they've been taking spares out of the Prince of Wales to put into Queen Elizabeth, which is not unusual with new kit, but it does mean you're doing what we call Christmas treeing the Prince of Wales. So that's not going to be able to set sail on operational duties anytime soon. But it's also, the trouble is the one vessel that the Royal Navy has to do these dry stores is the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Fort Victoria. And that vessel, the Royal Navy, like all three services, but particularly the Royal Navy, has got manning issues at the moment. So it's desperately short of personnel to take that thing to sea. And secondly, it's really old. It's not that reliable. And the replacements, 3 ships are meant to be replacing it, but they've got several years before they come into service. So frankly, first of all, there's just not they haven't invested in the full capability. The Defence has bought the 2 carriers, but hasn't invested across the suite to create the carrier capability. And the other issue is that, we have the at-sea deterrent and nuclear deterrent with our nuclear submarines. Now, to have a continuous at-sea deterrent, you need minimum of 4 submarines, which is why the Royal Navy has 4 submarines. And even with 4, sometimes with unserviceability, stuff like that, you struggle to keep one at sea all the time. If you want to have the carrier capability available 24/7, 365 days a year, you can't do it with just 2 carriers. And the danger, therefore, is it starts to look like, a
vanity project.
Well, yeah, you could say that, and we'll come on to that. But it's a bit like having a fire brigade that you're only going to commission for 6 months a year, and hope that that'll be the time when you have your fires.
Well, I mean, as a British taxpayer, I could take offence. I mean, I watch these carriers being built. I've been on them. I mean, I have to tell you, they are magnificent vessels. I mean, truly magnificent. But if I was a project manager and I'd built a product, and when it was launched, I had to tell the owner, actually, you can't use it because I forgot to get something else lined up, and I had plenty of time to do it, I think I'd have got my ass kicked.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting topic, because as somebody who's flown jets off the carriers, the previous generation, Illustrious, Invincible and Ark Royal, I am a huge fan of the power projection capability, a little bit of our nation driving around, having influence around the world. It's incredibly powerful. But you can't do it half-cocked. You have to do it properly. And I think there's couple of tragedies here, one of which is that we clearly haven't invested in the whole capability. We've been seduced by this whole idea of having the biggest ships we've ever had. And I know, because I worked in the Ministry of Defence during part of the time that this was all being delivered. And it would be fair to say that military, you never have enough money to do everything you want to do, so you have to prioritise. But ultimately, the people who make the decisions are the politicians. And it would be fair to say at the time that there was a political tailwind behind the carrier projects. Politically, a lot of sympathy. Now, at the time, call me a cynic, but at the time there was a Labour government in charge, and the two ships, when they were built in Gordon Brown's constituency. That created jobs and livelihoods for people. And the worry is that when you look at it through the lens of today, that actually we didn't create a whole through life capability cost, which we do in everything else. And we've ended up now with these huge potential of these carriers, huge potential. And yet there's been rumours about potentially selling off one of them. You know, they were talking about using them to plug gaps in American capability.
Got to rent them out.
Well, and they do have other roles. It's not just about projecting power, but if you, from the start, this was always going to be a flagship project for the UK, demonstrating its ability to project power around the world, and it genuinely had huge potential. It's a real tragedy to see that the one time when it could have come of age, particularly with this Houthi thing, that instead they're both tied up at Portsmouth. It just feels wrong.
Well, I mean, nobody knows how long this conflict is going to last. So this is probably a question that we can't answer, but, you know, will we ever see them in action in the Red Sea area, and you know, what's going on over there?
It looks unlikely, and the reason I say unlikely is because the process of literally throwing off the ropes and driving the ships to the Red Sea would take 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. But that would be completely ignoring the fact that you have to have a whole load of crew on board that are worked up, that are ready to respond, because they're going to a war zone. They will come under attack, as HMS Diamond is coming under attack out there. So you'd want to have a crew that's right at the top of its game, ready. You need to make sure that ship is completely packed full of stores, ammunition, that the crew that are going on board are trained and ready to go. Now, for the US, their carrier fleet, when it deploys, it's ready. And it trains 24/7. So it's ready to go throughout its deployment. It's ready to go instantly to respond to something going on. Getting something that's at ground zero tied up alongside to actually having a fully trained, competent, capable military capability is a lot more than just sailing the vessel there. A lot more than that. So you'd be talking about months, not days, to get that carrier in place.
That all costs money as well. And don't answer the question, because I think we'll pick it up later. The question is, should Britain be spending more on its defence programme?